Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will have to admit that I have some concern about this amendment. It is expensive to restore the state and local tax provision. But in considering how to respond to it, I think it's important to look at how we got to this point. Originally, we had the proposal from the Republicans that they would pay for a significant portion of their bill with something called the border adjustment tax. The border adjustment tax was the first of Donald Trump's many broken promises. You'll remember his most oft-repeated promise was that he would build a wall and Mexico would pay for it. And we found out very early in the year when Donald Trump proposed that he used the border adjustment tax to pay for the wall, that he was going to have Mexico pay for it a little later, like never. And the border adjustment tax was advanced by him then, and it was advanced by Republicans until well into the summer as the solution to provide over $1 trillion to contribute to this tax bill. And then suddenly, he abandoned it and they abandoned it. And that's when they began to focus on state and local taxes to tax people on the taxes they paid in the form of double taxation. They shifted to the state and local tax as a way of providing the money that they lost when they abandoned the border adjustment tax that would have increased the cost of imports in Texas for everything from avocados to automobile parts. So we moved from one bad approach to another that was double taxation. And so now we look at this double taxation and its inequity and the way that it favors a state like South Carolina, as the gentleman from California just pointed out, that gets $1.92, almost twice as much in federal expenditures as it contributes here. And we look at the claim that the thing to do is to double tax people. I am pleased that the gentleman from New Jersey in his amendment has fully paid for it. And there are a number of ways to fully pay for it in this bill because so much of the bill is directed at helping those at the top and a few multinational corporations that you can fully pay for this proposal without having adverse effect on middle-class taxpayers everywhere. There is the pass-through. He uses the corporate tax, and that's one way of doing it. But there's the pass-through provision. That's a giant loophole. There's the estate tax, which is a gift to just a tiny minority of people who are the most successful in terms of inheriting wealth in our country that could be changed. There's the alternative minimum tax, which says at least some people who have benefited so much, some corporations that have benefited so much, ought to pay a little bit, ought to contribute a tiny minimum amount to the cost of our national security and other vital services. There's international corporate tax dodging that's out there. So while he suggests one way to finance the restoration of a provision that just adds some equity for people in states that are providing public services and contributing to the cost of our federal government with their taxes, there are a number of ways that we could have fiscal responsibility in this bill, bring down the $1.5 trillion of borrowing they have, but at the same time see some equity for these other states. And so I'm going to support the provision, knowing that we have to find ways to change other aspects of this tax bill in order to fit in equity for these states. I don't see why someone in Texas should be able to get to not have to pay taxes on their regressive property taxes, which they made a provision for, but a state that relies on some other mechanism for financing its schools, its streets, its police, its fire, ought to be taxed on that. It just seems to be basically unfair, like the many other inequities that are part of this bill. So while I'm concerned by the total cost, I don't believe all of that cost ought to be borne by taxpayers in your state, and I support your amendment.